Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, designing basements where kids can play and relax. Information at callmosby.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. The St. Louis mayoral election is in its home stretch, and on April 8th, city voters will choose between incumbent Mayor Tishaura Jones and challenger Cara Spencer on who will lead St. Louis for the next 4 years. Make no mistake, whoever prevails will face major challenges in turning around decades of population decline and economic disinvestment. And St. Louisans will hold the winner accountable for clamping down on crime, even though a gubernatorial board will soon oversee the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. But Jones and Spencer will also have a host of opportunities, including figuring out how to spend money from the St. Louis Rams settlement to collaborating with neighboring counties on a host of regional initiatives. So we are grateful to have Jones and Spencer in studio today to answer questions about St. Louis's immediate and long-term issues. Jones was elected mayor in 2021 after serving as St. Louis City Treasurer and as a state representative. Madam Mayor, welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you for having me.
And voters in the now departed 20th Ward elected Spencer to the Board of Aldermen in 2015. After redistricting, Spencer represents St. Louis's 8th Ward, which takes in 13 neighborhoods, including downtown St. Louis, Soulard, Marine Villa, Benton Park, and Lafayette Square. Alderwoman, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
And joining me for this conversation is Rachel Lippman, who covers criminal justice and St. Louis politics for St. Louis Public Radio. Rachel, welcome.
I'm glad to be here, Jason.
Let's start this off with, I think, the biggest open-ended question that we could think of. What do you foresee as the biggest challenge facing St. Louis in the next 4 years, and what is your plan to address that challenge? Madam Mayor, you can take that question first.
Again, thank you for having me here. You know, St. Louis has been through a lot over the last 4 years, and we've been through all of it together, from high crime to coming out of COVID to making sure that we're investing in neighborhoods that haven't seen investment in over 50 years. I think that St. Louis's biggest challenge on the horizon is trying to make sure that we keep moving forward, that we expand our population, that we increase our tax base, that we take care of our children, that we expand our economy. Our economy is growing and we're starting to come back, and we need to stay on that trajectory for the next 4 years and beyond.
Alderwoman, same question to you. What do you believe is the biggest challenge facing St. Louis in the next 4 years, and what is your plan to address that challenge?
Well, Jason, I think the biggest challenge facing St. Louis is our massive population loss. We've seen population loss over the last several decades, but it's really accelerated over the last 4 years. And what's remarkable about it, and I think even more troubling about that, is that it's coming almost exclusively out of one geographical part of our city, North St. Louis. And we're not only losing population, we're losing diversity. We've lost 16% of our Black population in just the last 5 years. And we know that cities are growing in diversity. And when St. Louis is going the wrong direction there, I think it's a huge hurdle. It's not only a hurdle in growing population, but this is our tax base. These are the folks that we rely on to pay for city services and pay for the city to be able to position itself for the growth that we all want to see in our community.
We got a lot of listener questions, including about the population question we're going to talk about later, but one from Reddit that gets at the dynamics of state government. Mm-hmm. The General Assembly is controlled by Republican supermajorities, and all of the St. Louis representatives are Democrats. How will you ensure the city's interests are heard in Jefferson City? That is a familiar place for you, Madam Mayor, since you used to be in the state legislature. What is kind of your thought process for the next 4 years?
As a recovering legislator myself, I oftentimes visit Jefferson City and have done so even as in my tenure as treasurer, even if I didn't need anything to keep those relationships warm. I can't say the same for my opponent. And making sure, when you're in the superminority in Jefferson City, there are a lot of times you can't pass much, but what you can do is offer amendments and build relationships with your Republican colleagues, which I did while I was in the legislature, to add amendments. And sometimes you have to give those amendments to your Republican colleagues to amend to different bills that make them less harmful to the city that you represent. And I've been successfully able to do that, being able to work with my colleagues and pass important legislation while I was in the legislature that affected many, many Missourians. And we cannot ignore the place that the Missouri legislature or the place that they play in population decline, because they have passed regressive policies such as attacking abortion, attacking minimum wage, attacking DEI that push people out of not only the cities but out of the state in general. So we can't just lay that blame at the mayor's seat because we are in a state that has a bunch of regressive policies.
Alderwoman, if you are elected mayor, you're going to have to deal with a very conservative legislature that seems intent on putting a stamp on the city of St. Louis. What's going to be your strategy?
Well, the mayor's right. We have a lot of regressive policies coming out of the state legislature. But let's take a look at our Democratic elected officials here that represent in the Senate and the House. One of the most regressive things facing us right now is the state takeover of our police department. And it's not only important to make an appearance in Jefferson City and participate in hearings, but building relationships, having one-on-one direct communication with those House representatives, with those senators. That's really where the rubber meets the road. We know that it was the House and the Senate that decided the details of the state takeover. They even pushed through an emergency clause that makes state takeover take effect the moment the governor signs it. And it's my understanding that our mayor, had not reached out to the vast majority of the Democratic elected leaders down there. I was making phone calls over the last few weeks to try to work through some of the details of the state takeover bill. And my point is, Jason, that we need to start with our own party, and we need to not only show up in Jeff City, but we have to have constructive dialogue as these things, as the details of what the state is considering, how it will impact St. Louis as they unfold.
Mayor Jones, how do you respond to that, the assertion you didn't reach out to state legislators during the state control debate?
Well, again, Alderwoman Spencer loves to mislead people and tell a bunch of lies. I've had meetings in the mayor's office with a majority of the city delegation and reached out multiple times, not only myself, through my lobbyists, through my staff of the democratically elected, the Democrats in the House and the Senate. And it's not always the mayor that has to do some of the work. We have lobbyists that are employed that are doing some of the work. And for her to say that I haven't reached out to any of the senators or the representatives is patently false.
Respectfully, with those conversations, I'm hearing directly from them. We have 24 democratically elected representatives that represent the city and the region here. And the majority of them hadn't heard from your office, hadn't heard from you. And when we're talking about, these emergency clauses that make these fairly negative. I am staunchly in favor of keeping control. And respectfully, Mayor, these efforts weren't successful at even curbing the emergency clause or convincing the Democrat-elected representatives here to vote in favor of the city here.
Well, it's easy to criticize when you've never served in the legislature. You know that, or you don't know, that when some of these legislators had their mind made up before I even contacted them. There are some who were going to vote for state takeover regardless of whether I contacted them or not.
Madam Mayor, I serve as a legislator now, and I know how to build
coalitions. But you've never served in the Missouri House.
We're going to get back to the state control debate later, but Rachel has another question.
So, Mayor Jones, on election night, you did say that there are many things to criticize within my administration. And I want you on the show to be specific. What are the critiques that you have personally of your first term in office?
I would say that we haven't always done everything right. And no administration is going to be perfect. And no one can come in here and say that they're going to be elected and do everything perfectly. And I am not one of them. But when things do happen, I take control of them, and the buck stops with me. Some of the things like the discovery of what happened in the building division. As soon as we discovered it, we held those employees accountable, and we called for the FBI to do an investigation. These are legacy systems that have gone on for a long time, and when we find out that something's wrong, we go ahead and we take care of it, and we take care of it and fix it. You're talking about a city that's been in existence for hundreds of years, and we're also upgrading a lot of our processes. And as we do these upgrades, that's when we find out there's some of the chinks in the armor. And when we do find out, we take care of it. So that's just one example where we have found out that there's something wrong, and we move to take care of it.
One of the things I did not hear in that response, and this is something you've also said, is that you didn't respond to a January snowstorm as well as you thought you should have. And that's top of mind for many residents, is the city's response to that snowstorm. What took so long for the city to adjust its response and to get into those side streets?
Well, number one, the city has had a policy of never doing side streets. And there are people who I've talked to on the doors that say, the city has never plowed residential streets ever. And the time that we did, which was back actually in the Slay administration, it damaged cars because the plow trucks were too large, and they subsequently buried cars. And so we were using our typical playbook for addressing snow, and this particular snowstorm, we found that our playbook was inadequate. So we did make the adjustments necessary to call in contractors and also use other departments. And I apologize for everybody's frustration as they experienced this snowstorm. But it was snow, it was ice, and it stayed around for weeks. And that's also not the typical snowstorm that we have in St. Louis. We are used to it snowing, and then it melts a couple of days later.
Alderwoman Spencer, improving city services has been the cornerstone of your second run for mayor. But many of the difficulties Mayor Jones encountered were affecting basically every major city in the country, thanks to an extremely competitive labor market after the pandemic. Why do you think you would have done better plowing streets, filling potholes, picking up trash from Jones when you would have faced those same types of pressures?
Yeah, you're right, Jason. I mean, these are real serious issues, how you administer city services. But I think really one of the key differences is a focus, having a sense of urgency. We saw, the snowstorm was a very, very visible understanding of how the city operates and the lack of urgency in the city departments and from the administration. I mean, it was clear to me just a couple of days in that the response was inadequate. I think it was clear to most of us. And the failure to take urgent, immediate action was apparent to all of us. But that's been the case for many years. So you take the example of the snowstorm and you expand it out to trash removal and how you support city departments and how you make sure that the folks that are doing the jobs of the city have the tools they need. Take, for example, right now, our refuse department. We've been getting a lot of additional complaints after complaints after complaints about trash removal. Our guys working in the refuse department don't have running water in their facility, and they haven't for weeks. We've known that the Gasconade facility is an issue. We've been hearing complaints. I've been hearing complaints from workers, and they don't feel like the city has their back. And this is true of city refuse workers. It's true of our street department. It's true of our police officers. And until the city is an employer that our employees feel good about working for and feel like their employer has their back, we're not going to get the caliber of work that we deserve out of our city workers.
A similar question about the snowstorm, though. Every county and municipality struggled with that snowstorm, which, as a reminder, there, I think, was snow and then sleet, and then it dropped to 600 degrees below zero. And Sam Page didn't do well. Steve Ellman didn't do well. Municipalities didn't do well. Why is there so much blame on Tishaura Jones when this was a freak snowstorm that everybody failed at.
Yeah, it was a pretty unusual snowstorm, Jason, and I think one of the key things here is to remember that these unusual weather events are the norm from now on. And I heard you talk to County Executive Sam Page, and I think everybody can recognize that the issues in the city were far worse than they were in the surrounding county. I mean, we failed to take urgent action, put all hands on deck. There were so many things we could have done on the trash side of things. I talked to our refuse workers about how in years past they've taken the regular-sized pickup trucks, thrown some salt on the back, made sure that the alleys were passable so they could start to pick up refuse on a regular basis. And I don't think it's lost on anybody that the response in the city was just subpar when compared to the surrounding areas. I mean, we all have friends and families in the St. Louis County area, and comparatively speaking, 2.5 weeks in, there were still parts of Jefferson, major corridors that were still down to one lane. It was unacceptable, the response to the to
be fair, though, the highways were also still down to one lane, and that's MoDOT responsible for
Rachel,
the highways.
And I don't sit here and say that MoDOT or the state of Missouri does an exemplary job. My point is we could have done better. It was very clear to me, and that when we had our city department saying we didn't know this was an issue, that to me is unacceptable.
That's not true that we said that we didn't know this was an issue. Again, the Alderwoman is out here lying and misleading people. And what's worse, that the kids in Franklin County couldn't go to school for weeks because they couldn't get the snow and the ice off the ground. And when you're at a lower temperature like it was in the city, or actually after the snowstorm, your chemicals don't work. So you can throw ice on it as much as possible, and the chemicals aren't going to work if the temperatures are below a certain degree, if the ground temperature is below a certain degree. So to sit here and say, well, I can do better and have no plan, that's exactly what the Alderwoman is doing.
Last word before we go to break.
No, absolutely, Mayor. I mean, we have a plan. I mean, it looks like years in the past, like I've said time and time again, you need to have all hands on deck. We had refuse workers that showed up to do snow duty that weren't allowed to get that overtime. We have trucks of various sizes that could easily have handled
you're misleading. You are misleading.
Mayor,
you are
respect,
misleading.
I'd like to finish my point.
Again, you are misleading
Mayor,
the public when you talk about these workers.
That this was an adequate job. You're welcome to do that, but voters will
anytime
decide
workers
on
come
April 8th.
to work and they
Voters
don't
will
work
decide
is a
if
problem.
The response in the city is adequate, and that's at the end of the day.
And you don't have a plan.
Mayor, with all respect,
and
your
don't
plan
have a plan
was not adequate.
And you don't have one.
Your plan wasn't
And you don't have one.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll continue our conversation with St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones and Alderwoman Cara Spencer. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, renovating basements to boost home value. Information at callmosby.com.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to a joint appearance from the two finalists for St. Louis Mayor, incumbent Mayor Tishaura Jones and Alderwoman Cara Spencer. STLPR's Rachel Lippman will ask the next question.
Thank you, Jason. This is going to focus now on a topic that is the top of mind for a lot of people, and that is public safety. And Mayor Jones, crime overall is down in St. Louis 31% since 2022. That was your first full year in office. Violent crime is down, I think, about 13% between 2022 and 2024. That's things like murder, rape, aggravated assault. And that's good news. But this is a trend that is also happening nationally.
Right.
So how much credit can or should your administration get for a national trend occurring here in St. Louis?
Well, there are some things that we put in place that I think that have led to our crime being down. Number one being our Office of Violence Prevention, which I started in 2022 to work with community organizations on the ground, because we believe that that people closest to the solution, closest to the problem, are closest to the solution. Organizations like Mission St. Louis, for example, that employs our community violence intervention staff that go out in neighborhoods and are with community, with people in the community who are looking to commit crime, and deterring them in other ways and offering them a way out. Our CJCC, or our Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, which is led by Nicole Barton, is working with our entire criminal justice system to make sure that programs are being offered either while someone is going through the criminal justice system or in jail, so when they do get out, that there are options for them. And then also our St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, under the leadership of Chief Tracy, which is the first chief from outside of our city in our entire city's history, believes in data, leads with data, and through the CompSTEP methodology and the executive meetings that he's had with our officers, he's been able to make a marked decrease in violent crime in the city of St. Louis.
Alderwoman Spencer, given the crime data and given that public safety is the number one issue for St. Louis residents, or among the top issues, what is the case to make a change in leadership with the progress that we have seen with crime and violent crime?
Yeah, Rachel, you talked about the national trends, and that's a good thing. And the mayor pointed out some things that the city is doing that are working. But I would also point out we have a lot of room to improve. We've talked a lot about the 911 response times coming down. This is largely due to an automated response system that has been recently put in place, asking callers of 911 to press 1 for fire, press 2 for EMS, hold on the line if your life is on the line. These are terrifying ways to make our numbers look better, in my view, and they really are breaking down trust in the community. I'll also say, it's important that when you do get through finally to 911, that you have an emergency responder. Oftentimes a police officer is required when violence is occurring. And unfortunately, we've seen the police response time going through the roof, people experiencing car accidents, violence, all sorts of things that really do need an officer responding, and not seeing that. We've seen our officer numbers plummet. I think when the mayor took office, we had close to 1,200 police officers. Now we're down to about 850, according to the latest numbers I've seen. We have to have these staff persons present. But I'll also point out that while those crime numbers have been going down, one of the most visible crimes that have been trending in the wrong direction is reckless driving. And we see it time and time again. We had 20 fatalities last year, people walking, killed by a vehicle, according to St. Louis Police Department data. And when you see these very, very visible reminders that our police numbers are down, you see the sense of lawlessness, people driving in a way that's endangering the surrounding community, driving without license plates. All these sorts of things are terrifying to visitors, but even to residents who live here, experience that on a daily basis. And we need to get a handle on those very visible crimes.
I know that this is an issue you've talked about as an alderperson. Mm-hmm. Is there legislation that you had pushed while you were there or attempted to negotiate to address the issue of reckless driving, not just introduced, but actually got through to the mayor's desk and had it signed?
We have not gotten it through the mayor's desk and signed, but these are issues we have. I have led the effort to implement a reckless driving policy that we took from Kansas City, a city also in the state of Missouri, and they've been successful at reducing reckless driving. And, you probably saw last summer when we did the big gun bill, the bill that required a lot of work with the Board of Aldermen. I'm ready to do that work. We started that work. We laid the groundwork. I laid the groundwork last session. We didn't get through the finish line, but these things often take time, and I'm confident that we can do that in the year ahead, especially when these numbers are trending in the wrong direction, and it is becoming more and more dangerous to just be on our streets in any capacity.
You both, in your own ways, supported the reinstatement of automated traffic enforcement in St. Louis. Alderwoman Spencer, by voting for the authorizing legislation, and Mayor, you signed that legislation. How do you implement that as mayor in a fair way and make sure that it is not criminalizing poverty like we saw in Ferguson and other North St. Louis County municipalities in the 2010s?
We took very specific steps to make sure that as we pass this bill, as we negotiated the final passage, that we wrote it in a way that obviously didn't violate the Constitution, because we know it was previously struck down, but also not to target already vulnerable populations. And that the due process was not in the previous red light camera legislation. And so there is due process in the current legislation, and we are negotiating with the vendor at this point to try to get these on the streets sooner rather than later.
Alderwoman, if you are elected mayor, you will be responsible for rolling these out. How do you make sure that that red light cameras, automated traffic systems, whatever you want to call it, are rolled out in a fair way? I
think fairness is key, and we will be absolutely focusing on it. But let me say, while I think they play a role, I'm more interested in, addressing the licenseless vehicles. I mean, a red light camera or any of these automated systems isn't going to do anything if you don't have a license plate at all on your car, and that is a far too often occurrence. And so we're going to be focusing on those issues. I think they'll make a bigger impact with the reckless driving in general, the folks that are taking over our streets in a meaningful way, in a very, very dangerous and violent way, and taking vehicles off the street that are being operated like weapons.
But this is fear-mongering. So again, you just talked about Ferguson, and one of the primary reasons why we experienced Ferguson is because of the lawlessness in the municipal courts and targeting already vulnerable populations. We know for a fact that people who that have temp tags cannot afford to pay the taxes that are associated with the car, because the state of Missouri has set up this antiquated system where you can buy a car without paying the taxes as you and drive that car.
Has that changed, though, through
legislation?
That
has changed. That has
hasn't
changed.
Been implemented yet,
And we set up a program through Justine Peterson to help those who find themselves in this situation by offering a loan so they can pay off their taxes, so they can stop what we call riding dirty, and then get their licenses and everything up to par, so they can pay their taxes and ride clearly.
But Mayor, this isn't fear-mongering. This is the lived reality and the very lived experience of many of us who choose to ride a bike, walk, or even drive a car in the city of St. Louis. It's not fear-mongering to see people lose their legs, lose their lives.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want to
by people driving recklessly and without license plates.
Make the connection for us, either with data or your lived experience, between an individual driving recklessly and an individual who has either expired or temporary tags. Is there data that says people who are driving on the temporary tags are also the ones driving recklessly?
Well, the mayor made that connection. My
no,
point
she
is,
said, "Ask for
Mayor,
where's the data?"
With all due respect,
hang on,
please.
Hang on. You are saying that one of the issues is temporary license tags, and that contributes to dangerous driving.
Well, actually, what I said is unlicensed vehicles. And what my point was, Rachel, Mayor, what I'm talking about is unlicensed vehicles without license plates at all. And my point, Rachel, is when you have these automated systems, they're the red light cameras, they can't catch somebody who doesn't have a license plate at all. And that was my point, that these automated systems can be effective, but only to a point. And my point is that there are a lot of other vehicles on the road endangering the lives of our community that aren't going to be able to be addressed with those automated systems.
Can I add one point here?
1 point, and then we're moving on to the next
question.
So
we do have what's called the Real-Time Crime Center that has a network of cameras that even if the person does not have a plate, we still catch that car. And you can ask the men and women of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department that they do catch reckless drivers without plates.
We're not doing enough. We're not doing enough.
Again, there you go again. You can do it better.
All right. So we're going to ask another question to both of you. St. Louis Public Schools has had a lot of issues recently. That includes poor management that led to the dismissal of the superintendent this school year, thousands of dollars of questionable expenditures, and the collapse of its student transportation system. And we need to say the mayor does not have direct oversight over SLPS. This is in the hands of a 7-member elected board, but nonetheless, we got lots of questions about how you're going to support positive changes for the St. Louis Public Schools under the current structure. So I'm going to go to you, Alderwoman Spencer, first. Would you ever support a system in which the mayor has more control of SLPS, either a direct oversight system like New York City or Boston, or a hybrid model like Philadelphia?
Oh, this is an interesting question. And I have to say, in full disclosure, I come at this from a fairly somewhat biased perspective. I'm an SLPS parent. My son is a student in middle school, St. Louis Public Schools. And so I do come at this, with a bend towards our public schools. And I think all elected officials should, be first and foremost supporting our public schools. But, as far as the mayor having control or authority, I want to say I support the an elected elected process right now. I am open to considering other ways in which we could govern our school district. But right now, I'm focused on doing the job of the mayor as outlined in the city charter and under current laws. But I will say that as mayor, one thing I am committed to doing is having an educational professional in the administration that's helping to not only identify some of the issues with that our elected school board is facing. And let's face it, these folks are volunteers. They're not paid. We need some support within the mayor's office, just like we saw last summer when school was getting ready to start and we didn't have buses. The budget was having issues. And frankly speaking, the mayor's office was nowhere to be seen in addressing those issues and helping to support solutions like finding buses on day one.
Again, the Alderwoman is lying. We provided bus passes to the tune of $300,000 to public school students with the start of the school year. And we already have an educational professional in the mayor's office whose primary job is to be the liaison between all of our educational institutions, public, private, and charter, and making sure that they have a direct line to the mayor's office with whatever we need. Just because she didn't see what we did doesn't mean that we weren't doing outreach to the parents of public school kids. And my chief of staff, his daughters also go to SLPS, and we were very much involved in what was going on over the first 2 weeks of school, calling for our employers to have some grace for their employees who have children that are in SLPS too, as they were navigating this new transportation system. So, to say that we weren't involved is patently false again.
Now, I want you, before you respond, I want you to answer the question, though, about whether St. Louis City's mayor should have more direct oversight over the school system.
Yeah, I don't think that we should have more oversight. What I have been able to do effectively is be a good partner to SLPS and all of our educational institutions. As treasurer, I started the College Kids Children's Savings Account program, which has over 20,000 public school children saving millions of dollars for their futures. And we hope to expand that program and bookend it with college scholarships through the STL Promise program, which was proposed in the Rams legislation. I love going into the schools and talking to the kids about what the mayor does, because our children can't see what they can't be what they can't see. And my relationship not only with SLPS is strong, as well as the other educational institutions, because as mayor you can't pick winners and losers. You are mayor for all of the children that go to school in the city of St. Louis, and we cannot. We cannot pick winners and losers and make sure that all of our children have quality educational opportunities no matter where they live.
As promised, Alderwoman, one more point on this subject, and then we'll move on to the next
Sure.
question.
I mean, I think the bus passes are helpful for some kids, but when you're talking about elementary school kids and kindergarten kids, I mean, we have to have solutions that look like an adequate bus system. And my point is what we're doing, what the mayor's office is doing in supporting our St. Louis public schools and the school system as a whole is not enough.
Again, not enough.
We got a question from Elliot Meyer via email, and it talks about the issue of homelessness in the city of St. Louis. He mentioned that there's bills in the state legislature and courts related to the issue. This will go to both of you. And what is the plan to get community members experiencing homelessness the support that they need while maintaining the dignity they deserve? And Alderwoman Spencer, I'll give you the first word on this.
Yeah, I mean, homelessness is such a sobering issue. I mean, we saw when we were, talking about the snowstorm, as the snow was coming down, it was a Saturday night, and it was very late. And it was announced that we had, places for people to stay warm the next day, the overwhelming majority of which were libraries. The others, many of them didn't have Sunday hours. And it was clear to me that we didn't have a solution. I'm very proud that some of my donors, some of the folks in my network stepped up and supported the opening of an additional emergency shelter to save lives during that snowstorm. And I think it's really important that the city do more than just put a fence around City Hall, a fence that's been there for a year and a half, closed for restoration. It's such a daily reminder that we are not doing enough for homelessness.
So what is the more?
The more would be a plan, that works with our provider community, that focuses on ensuring that every year the limited funds that we do get from the federal government, A, stay in place, that $17 million that we get from the federal government, and B, be prioritized to make sure that we have enough adequate shelter space when weather is dangerously low, support the warming bus, something that was an absolute disaster this last winter, and make sure that we prioritize saving lives, Rachel, and then shift towards a housing first model that puts people on the path to rehousing.
Mayor Jones, what is the city's current plan to address individuals who are unhoused, and are there tweaks that need to be made to that plan?
Well, the Alderwoman already talked about the plans that we have that are already in place. I have expanded shelter capacity. I have expanded emergency beds, and we also stood up emergency shelters during the snowstorm. We have also, I can work with people that I don't always agree with and bring them together on the things that matter. And I have done so as chair of East West Gateway when we brought together all of our region's leaders, funders, and providers to come up with a plan and a strategy. It's a housing first strategy, like the Alderwoman already mentioned, to make sure that we are taking care of our unhoused as a region, because this problem is not just unique to the city of St. Louis, and our problems don't stop at our borders, and neither should our solutions. So this is a regional strategy on both sides of the river to make sure that we are providing more housing. The housing first model works and has worked in other cities, and have seen that after 12 months, 80% of the people that enter through a housing first model are still housed 12 months later. So we already have a plan and a strategy. We've executed an MOU with the COC, or the Continuum of Care, to make sure that everybody knows what their expectations are, and we are already moving forward.
With the winter storm specifically, and making sure that there were enough emergency beds, it was my understanding that either because there wasn't enough funding to do it or providers weren't interested, that there wasn't as much emergency shelter capacity as you were hoping for. Are there tweaks kind of within that area of the plan specifically in severe weather events where you're like, yes, this is a correction we need to make?
Yes, because now the RFPs are out there now for next winter, and we are providing technical assistance with those providers to make sure that they can apply. And then also encouraging them to work with fiscal sponsors, because when we look at the provider community, a lot of them don't have the sophistication enough to apply for these federal grants. So we are providing the technical assistance and pairing them up with fiscal sponsors so we can make sure that we have a good network. But again, also working with our region. We got to make sure that if someone finds themselves in a vulnerable position in Jefferson or Franklin County or Madison County, Illinois, then there are services there, that we have a network of services that we can refer people to in their community, so they aren't already traumatized by coming down to the city.
We need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll conclude our conversation with the two candidates for St. Louis Mayor, incumbent Tishaura Jones and Alderwoman Cara Spencer. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We're now returning to our conversation with St. Louis Mayor Tishaura Jones and Alderwoman Cara Spencer, the two candidates in the April 8th mayoral election. And we'll go back to St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippman for the next question.
The question that I want to get to as we kind of transition into the final part of this is, who is the person that you take the most advice from, and what role, if any, will they officially have in a cabinet? So, Mayor Jones, I'll start with you. Who is your leading advisor, and will they have an official role in your administration?
Well, we have a team sort of concept in my administration now. I don't make a lot of decisions in a vacuum. I have a chief of staff who's an accomplished attorney. My deputy chief of staff had a storied career with the ACLU. There are many people on our team that are subject matter experts. Our director of operations is also an attorney. So we try to take a team approach. We look at all of the pros and cons because sometimes you're faced with a bad decision or a worse decision. So we try to make the decision that harms the fewest people but also has the most good.
Mayor, Alderwoman Spencer, who is the person that you sort of listen to the most, your closest advisor, and will they have an official role in the in a Spencer administration?
Well, I think the person I take the most advice from or listen to the most is my son, Cy. He's 14, so I don't think he would really count for being an official advisor or having a specific role in my cabinet. But he does have a lot of input as we just drive down the street about stoplights and all sorts of things that really come from the eyes of babes, if you will. And that perspective is always very helpful. But I would say from I take a lot of input from the voters, the regular citizens of St. Louis. I think those folks are the most important when considering policies. But I'll also tip my hat to Nancy Hawes, who's my campaign treasurer, a serious advisor, an attorney, and somebody whose voice, whose perspective really is very, very valuable to me as I move through decision making.
Okay, we're going to do a lightning round. And the unofficial rules here are you have around 30 to 45 seconds to answer these questions. And if you go over that, you will literally be struck by lightning. No, I'm kidding.
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing, and it would also show that I have magical powers. The Rams money, if you had a biggest priority for that, what would it be? Alderwoman Spencer.
Well, I think there's not one, right? I think, but it is important to have a focus. So my focus on Rams would be downtown, housing in North St. Louis, and infrastructure throughout the city of St. Louis.
Madam Mayor.
Infrastructure, people, and small businesses.
Would you consider exploring privatization of city assets like the water or the airport?
Absolutely not.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Absolutely not. I've fought privatization on every single front. I've been very successful doing that. I will continue my strong commitment to public assets.
With the earnings tax possibly under attack in Jefferson City during the next 4 years, what is your plan to find a different source of revenue if it goes away, Madam Mayor?
Well, several months ago, I signed an executive order creating the Long-Term Revenue Commission, and that commission is taking a look at all of our sources of revenue. They are still working through that, and will come back with recommendations on if the earnings tax should be phased out, then what do we do to make sure that we are less compliant or less reliant on the earnings tax?
Alderwoman Spencer.
Well, I am a strong advocate of our earnings tax. I've helped run the campaign to keep those in place over the years, and I will continue to do that. But I actually will give the mayor some credit on that long-term commission. I think that hearing from the public, hearing from subject experts is an important and vital thing in considering how we can broaden and diversify our income structure for the city.
Now, before we go to the last two questions that will last more than 30 seconds, what do you think the biggest policy difference is between you and Mayor Jones, Alderwoman?
We have very similar positions on policies. I think both of us have been considered progressive and progressive thinking and left-leaning, if you will. But I think the biggest difference between the mayor and I is a sense of urgency, a real commitment to transparency in good government, and sharing data with the public, going back to CityStat and other things that the mayor's office is collecting and failing to really share with the general public.
Madam Mayor, what is the biggest policy difference you see between you and Alderwoman Spencer?
Well, I think the biggest policy difference between myself and Alderwoman Spencer is that I don't abandon my values for six-figure checks to my campaigns. And that Alderwoman Spencer oftentimes talks nothing about downtown, but she talks nothing about North St. Louis and parts of South St. Louis that haven't been invested in decades. And us as a city, we cannot succeed and grow if over half is left to fail. That's been the case for over 70 years in the city of St. Louis.
Well, that's not a difference, Jason. That's an accusation, and one that I think is unwarranted. In fact, I can see why people would have concerns about big contributions. We've seen the mayor as treasurer taking some of her biggest contributors and awarding major contracts from parking to sitting in the mayor's office, giving ARPA funds to no bid contracts to campaign contributors. But that's not my track record, and I stand strongly when folks are investing in my campaign. They're investing in a new path for St. Louis. They are not getting anything specifically out of return for that, and I really resent that accusation, Mayor.
But people should be concerned that Bob Clark is the number one single largest contributor to your PAC and has raised you over $500,000. He wants something in return.
Mayor, I don't know what Bob Clark wants, but I'll tell you, I
know what he wants.
Well, he hasn't shared that with me, so if he
rights.
shared that with you, that's fine. That's between you and Mr. Clark. But let me say, Mayor, that Bob Clark was also a number one campaign contributor and fundraiser for Barack Obama, for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I'm in a long line of folks I'm very proud to be associated with. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but Bob Clark has also said that he made that contribution to you as retribution because he could not get his way with our development corporation.
Well, Mayor, if you and Bob Clark have problems, that's between you and Bob Clark. But I can tell you that he has received no promises from me. And that's an accusation that falls in line, unfortunately, with your actions and your track record, not mine.
Oh, well, but the numbers tell the truth.
Well, we have a couple more questions before we end this conversation, and I want to go to Spencer first, Alderwoman Spencer first. If you win, you're going to have very little time to set up an administration. What is your transition plan, and what are you going to do to make sure it's not so chaotic that it blows up your 4-year term?
Blows up. Well, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, when Prop R, this sort of overhaul of our election cycle, made us so that we have primary and a general, very, very short order. This election cycle is unusual in that there's only 1 week between April 8th and taking office. So we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We are focused on winning this election, but we are spending a little bit of time, a considerable amount of time, building that transition and building and bringing in partners to help us build out exactly what that transition team will look like.
Mayor Jones, obviously the focus of both you and your opponent is to win the election. And I'm wondering how you see your path to victory. How do you rebuild a coalition of voters where that support seems to have faded and then keep up the margin in the North St. Louis wards that you did dominate in 2021?
Right. So the way we see our path to victory is simple. Turnout was abysmal on March 4th, and it showed that very few people even care who their mayor is. And a lot of the votes came from one part of the city. So our strategy is to make sure that people are aware that there is another election coming up on April 8th and increasing turnout all over the city, not just in certain parts that support us and parts that don't support us. We need people to turn out. We need people to care that there's an election coming up on April 8th, and we need people to turn out more than the 17% that turned out on March 4th.
All right. Final question for both of you. Perhaps if we have a little bit of time, this is the second to last question. Mm-hmm. How do your sons shape the policy decisions that you make, and what do you hope they learn from watching you do this job and are elected/reelected? Madam Mayor, I've seen your son grow from a tiny kid to he has to be like 7'3" now or something like that.
6'7", yes.
But I'd be interested in your question, and you mentioned your son earlier, Alderwoman, and you'll get the final word.
Well, The way that my son looks at this, and is the way that I do as well, is I want to make sure that we are making robust investments in our children. And so that's why I started a mayor's youth cabinet that has a lot of his high school friends on the mayor's youth cabinet, that they guide our decision making on issues that are important to them. Their top 2 issues this year are voter education and also gun violence. And we had a healing circle just last Saturday at their teen summit to talk about this issue. I want to make sure that my son and his friends feel safe as they drive around the city, as they go to parties or do whatever they're doing hanging out. And so that's why we've made robust investments in our youth and young people, making sure that our rec centers are open late on the weekends, and so that they are places where children can come have fun and just be kids.
Alderwoman, how does your son shape the policy decisions you make, and what do you hope he learns from watching you if you become mayor?
Well, not only is my son a consistent advisor and observer of how we do things and can do things better, but my service in city government is really centered around this idea, this concept, this commitment to making the city a place where all of our children can grow and thrive. So many people move out of the city. So many of my friends, my contemporaries' children have left the city for greener pastures, for cities that are growing. And so centering my public service around making St. Louis a place where all of our children can thrive and be a part of our community rather than seeing the continued population loss is really at the heart of what I want to do as mayor, putting our city on the path for growth and making our city a place where everyone's children will stick around for a lifetime.
We are out of time. I want to thank STLPR's Rachel Lippman for joining us today to question the two finalists for St. Louis Mayor, Tishaura Jones and Cara Spencer. Madam Mayor, Alderwoman, Rachel, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Rachel Lippman, and our executive producer, Alex Hoyer.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.